Up to this point, everyone knows the Red Hot Chili Peppers. By the end of the 90s and during the 2000s, this group was a staple. Their songs were played on countless radio stations, and they released their best-known albums that reached top charts all over the world. The Funky Monks captivated audiences of different ages and backgrounds through their powerful, cheerful, and catchy songs. However, not everyone knows that these energetic performers got through difficult times and had a dark past. Despite being known as charismatic rock stars, the Red Hot Chili Peppers were not always as happy as they showed. But to explain this, we have to go back to 1 decade before they became mainstream and in the public eye. The story of this band started at school where Anthony Kiedis, Michael Flea Balzery, and Hillel Slovak became friends. As the boys grew up, Flea and Slovak tried their hand at bass and guitar, and Anthony joined shortly thereafter to try his luck as a singer. Later, they included Jack Irons on drums, and step by step they formed a band. A short time before, they began recording some albums, and although Slovak and Irons weren't part of the first records, they came together to record the third one together. From their early beginnings in the 80s, the group showed its electric and powerful approach to funk rock. Although they hadn't created anything new from the musical perspective, their youthful energy made the band stand out among others at that time. With 3 albums under their belt, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Freaky Styley, and the Uplift Mofo Party Plan, the band was on the way to getting some recognition, but at that precise moment, the first tragedy happened. Hillel Slovak had been struggling with his heroin addiction. In June 1988, he called his brother and told him he had been having problems leaving it. He couldn't even talk clearly. Just 1 day after that phone call, Slovak died of a heroin overdose. This dreadful death hit Flea hard, who thought he could have saved Slovak and influenced Kiedis to stop doing heroin. Although this shocking event may not be related to what happened next, Slovak wasn't just the guitar player of the group, but one of their closest and best friends. Leaving this harsh moment aside, in the late 80s, more specifically in 1989 with the new incorporation of Chad Smith on drums and John Frusciante on guitars, the band released the album Mother's Milk, which served as an introduction to what was about to come. This is perhaps what most fans think are the original members, and I don't blame them. Even though that's not true, these musicians are who launched the group to fame. Sometime later, the band faced the recording of the upcoming album Blood Sugar Sex Magik. This 1991 recording was the first big success for the band. With a strong, funky, bright sound and plenty of energetic songs, the Peppers raised their first significant fame peak and made this album one of the most important of the 90s decade. They performed on TV shows, toured worldwide, and sold countless copies. Despite being a style already known, the Red Hot Chili Peppers were the first group that brought funk rock to the mainstream, and after the recording of Blood Sugar Sex Magik, they were taken more seriously. However, it is well known what usually happens to artists with overwhelming fame, and with such a meteoric rise, problems arise. The stability and mental health of Frusciante was perhaps in one of his worst moments. Being surrounded by excesses brought up the demons inside his head, and becoming successful evidently harmed him. During live presentations, John performed badly on purpose, committing mistakes and singing rough backing vocals. Frusciante was taken aback by his newfound fame and struggled to overcome it. He began to dislike the band's popularity and said they were too famous. John claimed that he didn't need such a level of success, and he'd just be proud to play in clubs like the previous years. Frusciante later said that the band's rise to popularity was too high, too far, too soon. It all seemed to be happening at once, and I just couldn't deal with it. John also began to hear voices in his head telling him, "You won't make it on tour, you have to go now." In short, fame was consuming him. There's a famous Red Hot Chili Peppers TV presentation on Saturday Live Night during Under the Bridge. Frusciante just yelled while he was supposed to sing. These actions angered the remaining members because they were harmful to the band, so shortly after, John gave a step aside and left the band. After Frusciante's departure, the band was shocked, but their desire to continue creating music was still alive. The problem of who was going to take the reins of the 6 strings had to be solved, so the remaining members reached out to Dave Navarro, who had been Jane's Addiction's guitarist. Following the breakup of his former band, Navarro didn't intend to be part of any other project. However, after trying other prospects without success, the Peppers convinced Navarro to join them. With a brand new member, the Red Hot Chili Peppers faced a new album recording which, after the success got their former one, was highly sought after by the fans. However, recording a new album wasn't the band's desire. The resultant pressure led by Blood Sugar Sex Magik practically forced and pushed the group to create more music. As you see, even before the beginning there was an atmosphere of uncertainty. Despite everything, One Hot Minute brought a new start, mostly influenced by Dave Navarro's style. His sound was characterized by heavy metal riffs, psychedelic rock influences, and experimental sounds that were pretty different from the sparkling tones Frusciante had accustomed us to. Inspired by this new approach, the group moved closer to an alternative punk style without losing its funky staple. Besides, Flea got deeper into songwriting, an issue usually handled by John. Thanks to that, the backing vocals were different from the previous recording. Flea even recorded a solo song, singing and playing bass. But of course, once the recording session started, problems came up. Throughout the whole process, every member experienced personal troubles such as drugs, depression, and divorce. After 5 years of being free of drugs, Anthony Kiedis relapsed back into cocaine and heroin addiction in 1994. In addition to that, Navarro was also struggling with substance abuse during the recording process. Up to this point, everything turned difficult with members under the effects of drugs and suffering personal pain. But it didn't finish there because during the recording the band got such devastating news. In 1994, Kurt Cobain, who was a band friend, committed suicide, and the Peppers received another heavy blow. All of this combined with the pressure and expectations that came with Blood Sugar Sex Magik sent the band into a tailspin of too much too soon. They had lost more than one key band member to drugs and drug-related deaths before they settled down to record the album, and it was noticeable that they didn't feel connected to the record anymore. As we mentioned, One Hot Minute was highly influenced by the band's personal struggles and misfortune. The first track, Warped, features an opening line in which Anthony gives a speech about his battle against drugs with a dark, psychedelic instrumental. The beginning of the song sets the mood for the whole album, a gloomy atmosphere, groundbreaking riffs, and reflective, introspective lyrics. Next, we have what perhaps is the best-known song in the album, Aeroplane. This track expresses how music can save you from pain and suffering. After so many tragedies, the group used music as north and what led them into their spiritual trip in the search of peace. Aeroplane captures the staple sound of the group and presents a childish tone that is quickly destroyed by the next piece. The third track is Deep Kick, and as its name evokes, it is related to the hard knocks of life. Again, the Funky Monks present us with an uneasy, quiet atmosphere featuring a monologue written by Flea about how substance abuse and excess brought out the worst side of them, and how they found salvation through music. This song is somewhat autobiographical. Through it, Anthony tells us experiences he had with Flea when they were younger. Pain and suffering are the main themes in this record, but friendship is as important as them, and also strictly connected to both. The album includes 3 songs about this: My Friends, Tearjerker, and Transcending. The first one makes it clear from the very beginning what it is about. The opening line directly refers to the grief that Anthony feels for his loved ones and the frustration of not being able to help. These feelings are strongly highlighted not only because of Slovak's death, but also because Frusciante and Navarro seem to go straightly in the same path. The second is a tribute to their close friend Kurt Cobain, whose life was always a source of identification for Anthony. The last one is wrongly thought of as a Cobain's tribute as well, but in fact is about River Phoenix. River was the actor Joaquin Phoenix's brother and John's and Flea's close friend who died of a drug overdose under suspicious circumstances in 1993, and still today his passing remains a mystery. Among its songs, the album shows an ironic ode to religion in Shallow Be Thy Game, placing church and religious ideals as methods of mass control and satirizing the phrase, "Hallowed be thy name." Following the same line, the song One Big Mob refers to a philosophical thought of being connected all together in an unconscious way, addressing references to nature that make us one big mob. The track that gives the name to the album suits perfectly. It expresses the hot time the members of the band were going through. 1 Hot Minute summarizes every musician's experience in that tough way, full of sorrow and affliction. Last but not least, the remaining tracks continue to describe self-told stories, evoking past emotions and the desire to get over them, like in Walkabout and P. The first is a slow-paced, smooth track, and the latter is performed by Flea all alone. Of course, they didn't leave aside their erotic side, as is shown in Falling Into Grace and Coffee Shop, songs that convey that funky and sexual facet they usually showed. Released on September 12, 1995, 1 Hot Minute is considered one of the most experimental recordings by Red Hot Chili Peppers, and although it managed to reach commercial success, was perceived as disappointing at press time. On one side, the public felt that the inclusion of Navarro didn't meet the standards of the fans, while on the other hand, this fresh sound brought new listeners who loved it. Still Nowadays is an album that brings a lot of debate among fanatics. After a tour where cancellations reigned supreme and with a somewhat frayed relationship, Navarro's last show was in 1997 at Fuji Rock in Japan. After several attempts to create what would be the successor to 1 Hot Minute, things were not working out. Between the lack of commitment and Navarro's continued drug use, the group's chemistry, no pun intended, was affected, and they decided to split up. Initially, it was said that it was due to creative differences, and that both parties agreed. However, sometime later it came to light that the trigger was when Navarro attended a rehearsal completely drugged, barely able to stand up, and behaved aggressively toward the other members. 1 Hot Minute was a project that went through countless adversities. The work touches on themes such as the loss of loved ones, substance abuse, and social and philosophical issues. All of this was driven by the pain, sadness, and frustration that the members were experiencing at that time in their lives. In the words of the current band members, it's an album they don't feel connected to and reminds them of a horrible time. The Red Hot Chili Peppers themselves virtually ignore their own album. With Navarro's departure, the songs included in this album were omitted for years in their live shows, as if they wanted to deny their past. Perhaps it was the collective desire to put their troubled and depressing history behind them that motivated them to do this.